Welcome to 8 and 9 Figure Mentors, the podcast that helps you get to know the people who start, grow, and exit 8, 9, and 10 figure businesses. In this episode, I'm joined by Trixy Castro. Trixy started private lending company Genesis Capital. She bootstrapped it, eventually raising $250 million in funding. She then started another company, Genesis Auctions, before selling them both. She sold Genesis Auctions to Fidelity and Genesis Capital to Goldman Sachs. All whilst in her mid-30s, a child of immigrant parents, and a woman in a very male-dominated industry. And she's back at it again, now running TRX Capital. But it hasn't been a smooth journey, and as you'll hear, Trixy has needed mountains of grit and resilience to get to where she is. I find Trixy's attitude really incredible. She's a voracious learner. She's always looking to learn from every situation, even in situations where people are negotiating against her. She's looking for the learning opportunities. It's also clear that she's got a really productive way of reframing certain situations to empower her rather than maybe oppress her. I think she's awesome. I hope you enjoyed this episode with Trixy Castro. Trixy, welcome to 8 and 9 Figure Mentors.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor.
So, Trixy, we've spoken a bit before, and you strike me as someone who definitely knows what she wants, and you've been quite intentional in how you've sort of built your career through business. Perhaps you could tell us a bit about how you kind of reverse engineered your way to the success that you've had.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that, when I started the company, it was truly your entrepreneurial story, right? A phone, a desk, myself, a big idea, lots of heart, and really zero experience. And as I went out there and I realized, wow, this could be something really special and really unique, I started to really think of what I wanted the end game to be. And I think very early on, setting yourself up with the freedom to allow yourself to think big, right? And when you're young and you have nothing to lose, because when I tell you I had zero to lose, that's an understatement. You're able to allow yourself almost this childlike mentality of dream big, wish for the stars, right? So take that and then putting a plan together and working backwards was just kind of something that I thought, you know what, this works for me. I'm a planner. I like to have a plan. I like to have a list of things to do. And so I think that once I got into it and started realizing, hey, there's a lot of challenges in business, right? For me at the time, there were so many, but one that was exceptionally challenging was raising capital, right? And raising that money to be able to meet the demand, because having put my first company together, I was a private money lender, right? So I had all this demand for lending volume. To give you kind of perspective on that, I started it out. I had personally, without any loan officers, I mean, it was just, very, very bootstrapped, about 150 million a month of demand a month. Okay. I had maybe $5 million raised, right? So it was this was pre-securitization, pre-everything. And my team, to give you an example, was a 14-year-old girl named Brittany who was working for a prom dress. Okay. So she was like child labor in high school. She could answer the phones from 3 to 5. Then she has the audacity to go and get the lead of the high school play. I'll never forget. It was Bye Bye Birdie. And I'm thinking, oh my God, now my one employee is gone. So we hired her best friend, Brittany. So now I have 2 high school kids, right? I hire my nephew to go, this was, a million years ago, to drive the properties and videotape them for me. He's my nephew. So I paid him in gas money, which I was going to give him anyways. So this was the dream team. And with this little dream team, it was the little engine that could. And I really didn't focus on that, because anybody that stops and focuses on that, they're going to end right there, right? Because all the woulda, shoulda, couldas, have to do's get in the way. So I think for me, I took a step back and I wrote out what I wanted it to look like, right? So this is my starting point. This is my team. I want to get it here. I want to find a way to merge the two worlds, to bring institutional capital right into this space that no one had ever heard of, right? That was traditionally hard money, traditionally mom and pop kettle in the back, lending money to a friend or high net worth individuals. And I realized like there was really no way to scale and turn this into a machine that I knew we could build. And so kind of taking that, writing out my plan and looking at it and thinking, okay, the goal is this, right? And like always keeping my eye on that prize, right? And the goal
Mm.
was to create an institutional private money lender, right? So where it felt and looked and had the mechanisms of a very family, quick, velocity driven kind of piece, but was truly a debt partner to the borrowers, but was a very well oiled machine that was efficient and ran like what we were used to seeing in the banking world, right? So it was kind of creating a hybrid that just didn't exist. And the little exposure I had to the world of banking, I knew that, hey, we've got to fine tune a few things, but it works, right? It works on a large, massive scale. And so this was a very different concept. It was very B2B, and it was working with seasoned professionals where I was constantly able to learn how they grew their businesses, learn where their challenges were. And I learned very quickly that the transparency thing worked for me, right? Being able to be transparent and say, hey, this is where I'm struggling. I'm looking to do X, but I'm here today. And having those conversations, people were willing to work with you and they were willing to take the ride with you, right? And so that was really meaningful because what I heard was, hey, we believe in what you're doing, right? Because there were so many naysayers along the way, all the 30,000 reasons it's not going to work. Okay, fine. I get it. Thanks for helping me overcome the objections, right? But all it takes is having those few that are going to say, yes, I'm going to, take this ride with you. And so I think explaining the vision to them almost solidified it in myself, right? What I hadn't
Right.
accounted for were all the topsy turvy changes in the marketplace. And that was fine because we had the mission. I knew what we were out to do. I created a secondary company, right? Because I wasn't able to raise the money as fast as I wanted to. Doesn't mean that other people wouldn't have been happy with that piece. That's fine. It wasn't what I wanted to do, right? I wanted to reach for the stars and the moon, and so put together an online auction company to almost like be a sister company to it, right? So now I had the private money lending piece. I had the online auction company. So on one side of the house, I'm selling the asset. My clients are the banks and servicers, and I'm going in and I'm saying, hey, this is what you have on your books. This is what the assets are worth. Here are the challenges, creating waterfalls, right? I can get you highest and best execution. On this side of the house, I can lend you Mr. and Mrs. Developer money. We can scale your business, right? So, kind of going through it that way and realizing, I have to stop and put a plan together for each of these companies, right? Yes, they can go in tandem, but being able to really identify what was the best for each of them, right? It's almost like having two kids, right? So being able to say, okay, this is the plan here, this is the plan here. And yes, if they intertwine, that's great. And that was actually something that just kind of came intuitively, right? Of wanting to have a plan and a goal. And I'm so glad that we did because although the companies were both incredibly successful individually and stood on their own, the crossover between the platform was sub 5%. Why is
Hmm.
that? Because the market shifted. So, what looked like a buyer for the auction house wasn't necessarily a qualified borrower for the lending platform, and vice versa. So, had I not done that, we would have been in a world of hurt. So, reflecting back on that through the years, I always stay true to that, right? Like
Mm.
figure out what it is that your end game is, work backwards. Don't be afraid to dream big and put that on paper. There's something about putting it on paper and then telling trusted advisors or friends or whomever you have in your circle about it to hear yourself putting it out there and then almost like putting it together like as a plan, right? Like a to-do list, right? It's just, I mean, as basic
Mm.
as that sounds, it was really something that I truly can tell you really worked for me, and those that I've worked with, it's working for them as well. So all a long way to tell you to give you a short answer.
It's amazing, Truth. There's so much to unpack there, but one of the things that I think is most impressive about that story is the fact that here you were with a bunch of kids, essentially, on the first step to your huge plan. And I appreciate that, talking through that plan with different people over time gave you, the more you start hearing it and the more you start saying those things and hearing yourself saying them, the more it kind of solidifies. But in those early days, how certain were you that your plan was going to come true, that you were on the right plan?
I wasn't. I wasn't
Right.
because A, it hadn't been done. B, there was no one to look to say, ah, they did it. Here's how they did it. Let me, take some. So there wasn't that, right?
Yeah.
Um, there was a lot of noise, right? And that to me is great because you just either tune it out or you don't, right? Um, I wasn't certain, but I knew I wanted it bad enough. And I wanted to be able to create a buffer, right? So here I am, a lender. I've got all this demand and I've got a very limited pot of money. Okay. So I have to figure out how to make that work. Again, this was pre securitization in my space. So it wasn't like I could take a big chunk of it and go sell it on the street like we can today. It was like, yeah, no, you're ahead of your time. The loans are turning too quickly. So imagine my entire portfolio was turning in 54 days. That was way too little of time for them to securitize and do the thing. So it was now, okay, that's not an option. Let me figure out how to sell my own paper and create my own securitization with high net worth. So I learned that piece, right?
Mm.
But again, doing that was a big like, okay, I can do that piece. We can go forward, right? And then it was taking the next challenge and breaking it down. But somewhere along the way, I realized, okay, this is all great, but I may not be fast enough, say, for your business, right? Say, Tim, let's say you're doing this and you're in a game of velocity and you're doing 100 homes a month in those days, right? Of flips. And I'm like, hi, but I really care and we're really good, but I can do 4 of your 100, right? Because I have limited resources and I have to spread the risk for the investors. I thought at some point that's not going to be good enough for your model. It's not going to be the right thing for your business. So, how can I provide an extra value and kind of create an environment where it is an ecosystem, right? So, I may not be able to help you with all 100, but those 4 are going to mean something to you because I'm able to provide you other things, right? And that's how we created the online auction company, right? Jokingly, I tell the team, I think I just have abandonment issues because I don't want the clients to ever leave. So it was a way of like roping everybody in, but really it was a way of understanding the asset, right? Because if I'm going to sell a home, I need to understand what it is, how much it's worth, and all the history in it to then be able to place a loan on it and vice versa. So it was very synergistic, but it was a way to safeguard against, oh my God, what if it doesn't work? And what that
Mm.
meant to me and what that looked like was, what if I can't raise the money fast enough? What if this dream of being able to institutionalize it, right? The world isn't ready for it. But I have to tell you, I spent maybe 2% of my time on those thoughts
Mm.
because for me, it was okay, here's the problem. Here's what it could be, right? Let me safeguard against it, build this company, and then let me not worry about it. Let me just keep running, right?
Yeah,
And I
right.
think that so much of us as entrepreneurs, we keep the running part, but we sometimes don't allow ourselves to build the solution piece as well. And I think, or the safeguard piece, right? Because
Mm.
we're so focused on the end game that there's 2 ways, there's more than one way to skin a cat, right? And
Yeah.
so that's a really key piece that I tell people all the time, like, don't limit yourself, right? Take a step back and look at it from every angle. It doesn't have to be solved just the way that maybe you thought it did when you first started, because as you grow as a person and as a leader, you also gain exposure and you learn how other people look at their problems and how they tackle them. And so I
Mm.
realized I didn't go to business school. I didn't have these incredible mentors that I could point back to. Like I said, I was limited in time, resources, exposure, right? And I wanted to find those that I could understand how they thought. How did they, what were their critical thinking skills like? How did they tackle problems? Where did I see that the fear tripped them up versus the knowledge, right? And so all of those things, it kind of started to just try and self-educate and learn as quickly as I could and share that with the team.
It's amazing. So, I mean, what I'm hearing is you started off with quite a clear plan, I guess, and you knew where you wanted to go. You also knew that you wanted it to be big.
Yeah.
And then as you started running, you're still keeping your eyes out to get that, you're keeping your eyes open to get that feedback from the world about, okay, what's working? What do I need to pivot? Like, I need to start this second business. Oh, but the crossover is not too big. So I need to build separate plans for each one. Like, you're not just, you haven't built a thesis and then you're going to die on that hill. You're
Right.
open to what's going on and the feedback that you're receiving from the world. Because I think that is also a danger with people that have a lot of clarity and high certainty, is that they kid themselves into something and they think that they can just will it to happen.
Right.
when actually there might be like you're saying, there's many different ways to skin that cat. There might be a more efficient way of getting there. So it sounds like you've got a balance of both of those things.
Well, thank you for saying that because I certainly didn't feel that way then, I'll tell you. It was more just, surviving, but I will tell you when you're in it, the entrepreneurial spirit and the ability to white knuckle things, right? It's really
Mm,
great because it creates resilience. But at the same time, if you can't take a step back and say, okay, am I really fighting this good fight correctly? Right?
mm,
You can get tripped up there. And I knew enough to understand that business is cyclical, real estate in particular is cyclical, and that a lot of it has to do with which side of the bed someone wakes up on, right? And I didn't want to be beholden to that, right? Because if my capital stack is telling me what I need to do that day, how do I know that they're the most efficient, well versed in my space, right? So I wanted
mm,
to make sure that I could create an environment where we were aligned and where I am out there, ear to the ground, really understanding each local market, and each local market is going to look different, right? And so getting out there and being out there myself, right? Jumping on that plane and getting out there and opening up the territories allowed me to see these business models and these business people that we're lending money to. And there's something about being there, touching it, seeing it, that I think changes your perspective, but that you also learn for your own model, right? Because then I
mm,
can see, okay, I can very much align myself and hitch my wagon to this group, let's say, but here are the downfalls I see in their business model, and here are the downfalls that can then impact me, right? And so I think there's something to say about doing that and bringing your team with that, right? Because if your team understands the why, here's the purpose, and here are the things we look at, you grow together. So much of it truly felt like we were just going, to try and be really good partners, right? And that was a really fun kind of vibe. And I think as we kept that through the years, now, the world's changed and COVID's taught us to work remote and all these amazing things, but I still stay true to, you just got to go out and see it for yourself, right? I can't tell you what I
mm.
don't know.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. Um, you built Genesis Capital from the start with a view to selling it, I think.
Yes.
How did that influence your decisions and your strategy?
So I built it to sell it because I wanted to be able to have a seat at the table. And I'll tell you why. Because here I am, very young at that time. Hi, my name is Trixie. I have zero experience in the capital markets. Please give me hundreds of millions. No, 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 just kidding. Billions of dollars that I can go place in the marketplace. I promise I'll do a really great job, right? That wasn't going to cut it. So I was all heart in the right place, but I knew I had to create an environment for myself where I could establish a track record for myself and the team, right? So,
Mm,
say, God forbid, I got hit by a bus tomorrow, the team now has the story, the track record, the know how to. So, it wasn't just about like me, it was about how do we do this for the greater picture of us, right? And so, as I set out with Genesis, it was this company needs to be sold for these reasons because it hasn't been done in this space. It needs to be sold to a large firm, right? I want big name and lights. It needs to be able to allow credibility into our space so we become a thing, right? We become an
mm,
asset class. It wasn't that
mm,
before. And that was unheard of. It was like ungodly to even say that or think that. Mind you, I didn't know anyone in the capital markets world, right? Let alone, these big institutions. And so having that vision of like the way to win and the way to create this as an established asset class is going to be that, right? Coupling the money with what's actually going on the real kind of on the boots on the ground was the vision. And I couldn't have done that if I had done it any other way. You had to have a
mm,
monetization event, right? To me, okay, great, you take some chips off the table, but really the big one win was now we have a track record. Now I can come back to the table with, hey, here's what we've done. We know what we're talking about. Let's put together a capital stack that works. Let whatever the situation was, but we would then have that track record. So that was the vision from day one. And I didn't think that keeping it kind of hidden under hidden was going to accomplish that.
Hmm.
And then, of course, there's things along the way that help, right, grow it. Then reality TV came in and started, highlighting flipping houses. And, then it was like, we knew a girl that came to a cocktail party and wouldn't shut up about something like that. Let's call her, right? So all of those things helped.
That's amazing. Obviously, I suppose something else that may have helped. At one point, you raised, I think, 250 million
Yep.
from Oaktree.
Yes.
Um, at that time, like you mentioned, you were sort of an unproven entrepreneur. This was a new asset class. How big a gamble was that for them? And what do you think they saw in you to have that confidence?
It was a huge gamble, right? Because it hadn't been done. And you can't point to it and say, but look, they did it, right? And here's how we're better. You couldn't do that. So
Yeah.
there was that. I think and I remember it like it was yesterday. It was very synergistic because they were very entrepreneurial, coupled with extremely intelligent, bright people that had had many successes, right? So they had all these successes under their belt. And instantly I gravitated toward teach me, I want to learn, right? Please
Right.
teach me what you've done. Let me take notes on everything you're saying because I have this amazing little engine and machine that we can scale and we can grow and we can do all these amazing things, but I need to learn what you can teach me. And I think that from day one it was very obvious to me that I could learn so much, but that they were also very open to understanding my space, and they weren't afraid of rolling up their sleeves and saying, hey, let's go walk that project with you. Let's go look at
Mm.
it. I also realized that they saw the talent in my executive team. At that point, people had grown up a little bit. We had pulled other resources, taken a couple people from competitors, those types of things. And I think that they were able to see the grit, right? That we
Mm.
were a team that wasn't going to let anything stop us, right? We weren't afraid to go in and do what it took to be able to, put this whole machine into place. And I think that there's something to that because we were like-minded. And
Mm.
I think when you're out there raising money, that's not like the end all be all, right? It could either make you or break you if you don't have that like-minded kind of environment where you feel like you can actually collaborate. I think it would be a harder challenge. And Oaktree proved to be the exact opposite of that. They proved to be a great partner. It was very synergistic. But from day one, we had the same end game, right? It was
Mm.
always, we're going to sell to this, right? And so along the way, we had to then go educate the space together, right? And educate kind of everybody of like, hey, this is a thing, it's an asset class, da 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 da. Because otherwise, who's going to buy your company? You might think it's great, but if you don't take the time to make sure that all your ducks are in a row and that the world understands, then it doesn't. And I'll have to tell you that I remember that took a couple of years just to be able to
Right.
get people to understand, the right people to understand, why this was important and how it made money and. So we were aligned from day one.
But it also sounds like you were you sort of approached it with, I guess, humility and an eagerness to learn
Absolutely.
from Oaktree. Whereas my sense from talking to other people who've maybe sought investment is that they feel like they need to portray it as they know everything already and that they are the expert and that the investor is sort of lucky to be coming along for the ride. So is that, I mean, firstly, is that your experience? And then secondly, is that sort of eagerness to learn from everyone that you encounter, is that something that just you have as a trait? Have you always been that way, or was this just at that point in your career that that was your sort of frame of mind?
I think that I'm so grateful to my parents. They're very, very genuinely kind and humble people that my mom loves to learn. So I learned, and I have this incredible thirst for knowledge, as do my younger sisters, by the way.
Hmm.
We learned that from her, and that it's okay to be you, right? And so she taught us very early on there's ego and there's self assuredness, right? And you can be comfortable with yourself and in your own skin with who you are and your capabilities. And that's separate of ego, right? There's confidence and you can exude that, but you want to always learn because you're not the
Mm.
smartest person in the room. And if you are, go to another room, right? And so I think that always came, that was ingrained and instilled in me as a person and as a woman in business. It was I already knew how many chips were against me. Like I didn't need someone to tell me that. I trust me, I knew that, but it didn't matter because I
Mm,
knew this and this was good enough for right now because if I could learn this, I could learn this and this and this, right? And then the
mm,
world is my oyster, but I think that there's a little bit of swagger that you have to have as an entrepreneur to let things roll off your back. But I think sometimes people take their own stuff, right? And their own issues and their own drama, and they like merge it into that. And then they have their ego leading the business because
mm,
that's how they operate as an individual. And I think that's a recipe for disaster. It works sometimes, and we read about it, we hear about it, and that's great. But that's few and far between of the detrimental stories that we don't hear about, right? I think that if you come in and yes, you're the expert in what you do, and if you're not, go become the expert in what you do. And I think that just comes from trying your absolute best over and over and
mm,
over to be able to, to hone that skill set. There's something to that. And you couple that with your kind of confidence, you can get to the same place and still be coachable. I think the minute
mm.
you're not coachable and you're not willing to learn from somebody, you created your own death sentence at that point. At least that's my experience.
That's fascinating. Um, I want to fast forward to the point at which you decided to sell actually both companies, Genesis Auction, which sold to Fidelity, and then Capital, which sold to Goldman Sachs. Firstly, how did you know that it was the right time to sell these businesses? Because that must have been quite a difficult
So
decision. These were your two
On
babies, right?
lending, it was pretty easy. Pretty easy to know. It was okay. We're so far ahead, right? We want to get here. Our competition's here. When we're here, let's start moving in that direction, and
Right.
we did, right? So that was like strictly like a volume. How much, when a production, if you will, are you able to do? So that was kind of a no brainer. On the auction side, it was a little bit more challenging because that's a very different type of business because you're selling these assets for banks and servicers. And so you're really beholden on how much product they have. And I didn't know how much, what the world was going to look like. So really on that business, there was a lot of luck, right? That came with it. You have to have a little bit of luck in business and in life. But in that business, it was something that I sat down and kind of had this self-talk, right? I'm like, okay, as the leader of the business, when we start getting to these volume numbers and have this client base and do these things, I'm going to start looking for that exit, right? And different than the sale to maybe Goldman, it was different in that I wanted to do that sale on my own, right? Kind of owner to owner, right? And really
Mm,
understand what it took to be able to work backwards so that, the next time around, I knew how to set up a company, understanding what the buyer was going to be looking for. So it was a little bit selfish on my part to want to be able to understand the buyer's mentality. And you're not
mm,
going to get that unless you're actually speaking to a buyer, right?
mm,
But let me tell you, it has its own set of challenges both ways. Both are great, and both, however you decide to do it, is great. But there's a whole nother side of life that happens after that too that no one really prepares you for, right? And you're like, oh my God. In my case, I've been working since I was 14 years old. Like, what do you mean I can't pass go? I can't collect $200 and I have non-competes every which way to Sunday, which of course I'm going to
yeah.
honor and then some. But I mean, that's a whole nother
Yeah.
podcast.
Well, it's interesting. One of the common themes amongst the people I've spoken to who've sold say that period after selling is often the most difficult because, yeah, like you say, they've been battling away every day, all day, 8 days a week for however many years, and then all of a
Right,
sudden, ping, like you're not even
right.
allowed to work in some cases. That's
And
quite
in
a
my case, it was couple that with at the age I was, many women were having children. I At that age, I was making a conscious decision to birth my companies and have children on hold, right? And
mm,
so that was a big life decision that I tell women all the time, you got to factor that in, right?
mm,
You don't want to miss out on both sides. If that's not what you want, then, prepare for it and plan. But I mean, there's a strategy to that, which, okay, fine, we can talk about that. We can put that on paper, but what does life look like after? It's almost like you have this sense of loss
mm,
because as an entrepreneur, your whole point wasn't just to make a dollar. Like That's
Yeah.
great. And that's a way to keep score, but that doesn't give you the satisfaction of like the win every day, right? So there's almost this sense of loss that I tell business owners all the time, like I want you to like take a step back and actually prepare for that, and also to hold on to your money, right? I've seen so many people crash and burn after the sale because they didn't put the same effort into their own financial investment strategy. So then it was just like money all over the place, right? And so we've seen that story. So I tell people all the time, you got to take a step back and like
Mm.
clear your head for a second. Life's going to look different. And you have to map out what you want it to look like. And you have to apply the same principles, the same disciplines that got you here to whatever it is that you choose to do. But yes, it is very different, and it can almost be depressing. And you have to be able to like know that going into it, and figure out what you want it to look like, right? Many exits you stay on and you do that, but it still looks different. Now you have a boss, right?
Mm.
Or many exits you kind of ride off into the sunset. And so just kind of understanding what you're getting into and maybe talking to people that have been through it, I think would be helpful.
You sold the businesses in fairly quick succession, didn't you? I think 2017, 2018,
Yeah,
they were
9 months between
nine
each other.
months. What was that period like for you personally? I'm imagining you did some fairly long hours at
Oh
times.
my God. I think I aged 20 years. I really do. I think I aged 20 years, and I think I grew in, thick skin even more because, the buyer's job is to negotiate. That's not
Mm.
my nature. My nature is not to negotiate. My nature is to go out and build, right? So like give me the satisfaction of like, good job, right? That's a big
Yeah.
part of the whole reward system for entrepreneurs. And I'm no different than other entrepreneurs. That's kind of a thing, right? And so you kind of have to be able to take a step back and not take it personally. I relate it to someone telling you your baby's ugly, right? You can't take it personal. You can't. And how do you not, right?
Yeah, right.
So I
Because
think
they've got
taking
people on
that,
their team basically just telling you your baby's ugly
right,
so you bring down your valuation.
right, exactly. And telling you in a very sophisticated way, which is great, right? So there was a lot of learning and growth, but I literally had to like take a step back and be like, okay, Trix, this is what you and the team have worked so hard for. They're buying something you built, right? And so
Mm.
that can never be taken from you. So where you end up is where you end up. But no one can take away the fact that you built something out of nothing. And I
Mm.
remember taking a moment and literally thinking of it of like, okay, we built something. We did something so great that we have people negotiating with us. That's amazing. So I chose to change my mindset in that very moment because otherwise I was going to get defensive and do this, right? Like
Yeah.
any human would. And I was like, no, I want to learn. I want to
Mm.
learn what they're looking for because the next time I want to be that much better, right? I want to have been prepared. And so I learned, I have to tell you, it was 9 months. It was, and even before that, right? Because that was just when the sale. So figure it was a year and a half of like just, taking hits. And yes, you can have a very strong chin, but there's so much more to that. You learn the art of it. And I really
Mm.
looked at it as a let me learn the art of this because who knows if I'll have this opportunity again. And so that was really important to me to be able to change that mindset and to be able to do that. Right. And so I really looked at it as a win. I have to tell you. So where others might have gotten, really defeated, right? And perhaps that's a strategy in some cases. That wasn't the case for me because I really felt very strongly about the idea of let me learn from this. And yes, is there long
Mm.
nights and do you get to see the light of day? No light of day, long nights, lots of stuff.
You mentioned there sort of taking a moment to reframe the situation that you're in and, I guess change the narrative in your head. Look, I'm in a position where people are trying to negotiate with me. Isn't it wonderful that is that a tool that you've used throughout? Is that something that your mum taught you, for example?
That's so funny. I've never even thought about it till right now that we are talking. You're right, because I think it is very much a part of my day to day. I really do. You're right. I really, I look at it and I think of who's on the other side of the table, right? Do I
Mm.
respect something? Do I respect what they've done? Do I respect what they're saying? Because the other side of it is you're almost like training yourself to tune out the noise, right? And
Yeah.
I tell people all the time, like, listen to what you allow yourself to take in, right? And if it's good feedback, meaning, and it can be very tough to hear, right? And it could be your baby's ugly, 10 ways to Sunday. And that's okay if the source that's telling you, and if you feel good about, like, let me learn from it, right? But I think I always look at it and I think it through and say to myself, okay, how can I improve? How can we be better? Is there validity to what I'm being told? But am I
Mm.
missing a piece, right? Because oftentimes where there's smoke, there's fire. So I really try and then kind of dive into it. I don't just let it go because I want to learn and be the best. And sometimes you look at it and you think, you know what? That's great, but I don't need to do that to get to where I want to go. Right. And so
Yeah.
you may want to do some of those tweaks. Sometimes it's not worth it. Sometimes it doesn't make enough sense. And sometimes it's part of the strategy where I'm like, yeah, I'm aware of that. Right. But that's nor here nor there to where we're trying to go. And you have to be able to be okay with that.
Okay, so you're essentially sort of triaging that feedback. Like, is this valid? Do I respect the source of this feedback? If
Right.
yes, am I already aware of this issue? If yes, that's fine. If no, like there's something useful that I can take. There's something I can learn. Coming back to that theme of
Right.
you seem to
Right.
always be looking for ways that you can learn from the person you're sitting over the table with.
Yep. Always. Because they've done something that I would love to learn, right? In their
Yeah,
field.
yeah, that's awesome. Um, I want to ask you about, you touched on the deciding to have children part. Obviously, you're a female minority entrepreneur in a very male dominated industry. Did you view this as a disadvantage?
Um, no, and I'll tell you why. Because many people tried to make me buy into this narrative that they had in their head that it was a disadvantage. I mean, so much so that I'm like, well, I already know that's what they think. So I'm just going to be me. And that's got to be okay. But was it hard? Absolutely. And I
Yeah.
have to tell you, having a strong mother was very helpful. Now, mind you, my mom made it to maybe the 11th or 12th grade in Cuba. Okay. So she didn't always understand. And I didn't come home and cry to her type of a thing. It was the foundational years of having that sense of confidence in self, right? That came into the boardroom or into the situation. It wasn't like, let me go call my mom and cry. It was never that. It was, huh, this was instilled in me at a young age. Like, I'm not
Mm.
trying to be you. Right. And I'm so glad and grateful for that because I was able to develop thick skin. And I think being a woman in a male dominated world, trying to pioneer something that people have never heard of, right? That they don't even know that they want, right? It's 100% a secret weapon that you can have, right? Because
Mm.
we're not coming in and saying, oh, me, I'm so amazing. No, it was okay, here's what it is. Let the best person for the job have the business, right?
Mm.
And so it just fueled that. And it really gave me a motivation to try and pave the way for other entrepreneurs and other women. Because if you really think about it, no one fits the mold of what the other side is looking for, right? You're never going to be that perfect person on paper and on business of whoever is on the other side. It just doesn't exist, right? And so I was okay with that, right? And I was okay with that. But yes, it challenging? Was there times that people would try and knock that and try and, use it against me? Oh my gosh, time and time and time and time again. And you just have to be okay with yourself and
Mm.
remember the goal, and just it's noise. It's just another form
Yeah.
of noise.
I get you back to your feedback triaging, aren't you? Is this valid criticism? No, right. Let's carry on then.
Yeah. And then it was like, I remember so many times where it was like, oh, your name is Trixie and you walk in here wearing pink and you look like Barbie. And I'm like, well, thanks. That's amazing. Right. And so it was like, how are you going to take that? Right. Am I going to take that as the dig, or am I going to take
Yeah.
that as like, absolutely. There was so many times, can you get us the water? Absolutely. I'm here. I'll get you water, tea, coffee, whatever it is that you want. But I'm actually here to meet with you to get a deal done. Right. And
Mm.
so, yes, there's a lot of noise that comes with that. And I think when you're okay with yourself and you can just be open and vulnerable about it, people want to get behind that, right? And so
Mm.
I found some of the most incredible supporters of the team and I were these amazing men that were great fathers, great husbands, and they wanted to promote women, and they were
Mm.
100% willing to get in the good fight with me, if you will. So it's, I think, a lot of what you put out there too.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Good. Oh yes, that's awesome. And I think it's so important, isn't it? Like as I've been filming these podcasts, I can't tell you how difficult it's been to find female guests who have done things and really big things and want to be featured in podcasts. I talked to the podcast booking platforms, and the number of females they have on their rosters is relatively small, and it's I don't know, we need more women in like these sorts of positions where we can use we can have role models, right? Did you have other than your mother, did you have strong female role models growing up? Like what examples did you have that showed you, yes, do you know what, I can do this? Or was it just that inner sense of self-worth that your mother had sort of built with you?
I think that she was very mission focused, right?
Mm,
Whatever her mission was, she was going to figure it out. And I knew at an early age that there was two types, right? You're either going to just be the person that lets life happen to you, or you're going to get out there and make it happen. And I knew, and I could see it. I mean, she came to this country and both my parents had to learn to speak English and they had to learn to assimilate. And it was, I give them so much credit, right? And here you've got, a completely different world where she grew up in Cuba under communism, under these terrible things. And then to come here. So some of her fears, right, were not something that I could identify with because
mm,
growing up in the US and being born here, it's the land of opportunity. But what I saw was her every day trying to push past that, every day tackling it head on, right? And seeing somebody actually do that and not letting whatever is in front of them get in their way. I think I found it to be very inspiring because I'll give you an example. My mom had an interview. She had an interview with a woman that had Alzheimer's disease. Okay. And so it was to be like a caretaker. It was to be the housekeeper, essentially, caretaker, and do all of it. And the babysitter flaked, and I was 3 years old. And so she had to take me with her to this interview. And I remember being so excited because I got to wear like a party dress, right? And I was like, yes. And she was like, Trixie, do not say anything, be quiet, be on your best behavior. And I walked into this house and it was the most beautiful house I'd ever seen. I mean, it had this incredible yard and they were so lovely. And they were an Italian immigrant family that come here with like 40 cents in their pocket and made it in real estate and banking, go figure. And I remember her going through the interview and like kind of doing this, right? And just being nervous and anxious. Of course, you're in this palatial estate and you're feeling like, okay, I really need the job and I've got my kid here and that's probably distracting. And I'm sure I wasn't quiet. And I remember saying, you need to have my mom because you need to bring her on, and they, hire my mom. However, and I remember them saying, okay, well, why? And I was like, because then you get me. Hello. Like, this is so great. I want to be here with you and hang out, or
amazing.
something to that effect. And I remember how excited she was, right? But I remember her pushing past that nervous energy and getting that. And we moved into their home. And I didn't realize I grew up in someone else's home and that we were the staff, so to speak. And I lived there till I was, I want to say, 14 years old. So that's all I knew. But what I did know is they had done something that I wanted to learn how to do,
Mm,
right? And they had become successful and they had kind of created their own narrative and their own story. And my mom had found a way to push past her fear. And I always remembered that and reflected on that. Like, if she could do that, I could push past whatever was in front of me at that time. And so it was just a matter of like taking those like life lessons, if you will, and solidifying them in yourself,
mm,
because there weren't a lot of female role models growing up. There wasn't. It wasn't like it is today. We have a very, media focused world where you can look something up and see it. It wasn't like that.
mm.
And so it was. Now I feel like we've got more opportunities to see women and for women to have a microphone and to see the strength. But no, it was, let's do it together.
What would you say to people watching or listening who maybe feel different to the default in the space that they're in, whether that's gender, whether that's age, background, whatever? Someone who feels like an outsider and isn't sure whether their industry is going to accept them because of that.
I think that I actually think you can channel that to be a very positive thing. If it's something that you want, and that you feel that you have the skill set for, the rest of the world and the rest of the noise doesn't matter. Because I can tell you time and time again where I was told I would never make it. I didn't fit the role. I remember working to get a meeting for a year and a half, and I was with a very important person in the banking world, and I was so excited. And then being told by another woman, okay, that, hey, do not, I don't even know if you should go to the meeting. What do you mean? You work for me, right? What do you mean I shouldn't go to the meeting? Saying to me, you're too much. You're too extra. Don't come in looking like you, okay? Wear a double-breasted suit, no makeup, hair in a bun, flat shoes, which is great if that's someone's look. But basically you're telling me not to be me, right? Do not be feminine. Do not, just stay in this box. And I'll never forget looking at her and being so hurt, because I'm thinking, like, you missed the whole point. You missed the whole point. We are all going to be told that we are not the right fit, that we are different, that we don't have what it takes. You bought into that. You drank the Kool-Aid. I'm sorry for you, but let me use that to fuel and clear the path for others. Because today, yeah, the world may not accept the Trixie, if you will, but look how far we've come over the last 50 years, over the last 30 years. Yes, we have ways to go, but it takes those pioneers being willing to be okay with the noise coming at them, right? And sometimes you have the arrows in your back to show that you've been through the battle wounds, and that's okay, because you can say to the next person, hey, I've been there. I know what it's like, and it gets better, right? But you have to make it better, and you have to be okay with that.
If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on whatever podcast platform you're using, and don't forget to leave us a rating and review. This is a brand new show, so we need all the ratings and reviews that we can get. And if there's anyone in your network that you think might enjoy this, then please do send them along.